You might be building trust as a subject matter expert, but are you really building trust as an executive leader?
Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out, because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms.
Hello, corporate badasses. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, as always, to have you with me again this week. Now, I don't know if you've been following me for a day or for perhaps the past 8 or so years that I've been helping women get promoted into the C-suite. But whether you're new or whether you've been following me for a while, you know that my executive promotion process has stayed true. This is not something that I knew about when I started coaching. It's something that I created as a result of my clients having success in terms of getting promoted to the executive suite. And then at some point, I put it into my book, Promotions Made Easy, a step-by-step guide to the executive suite. And I also turned it into an assessment. So if you have never taken this assessment, I call it a promotability assessment, and you can access this free assessment at readytobepromoted.com. If you have not taken this assessment yet, go to readytobepromoted.com and take this assessment right away. On today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the lessons that I've learned over the years through listening and reading my clients and the women like you who have taken this assessment and really gathering data over the past 4 or so years that I've been running this assessment, and how this assessment in particular has shifted how I communicate about the work that I'm doing. The first thing that I want to start out with, I talked about my executive promotion process in general. And so when I started out to become an executive coach, I was actually working for a women's leadership organization in Silicon Valley at the time. I walked the talk and told my boss that I wanted her job someday. Thankfully, she said, yes, let's do it. And she became my mentor and my sponsor and a huge advocate for me in growing my business and what my business was to eventually become. And when I set out to create my business, I wanted to differentiate myself from the work that we were doing inside of the Women's Leadership Program. And I decided to specifically focus on promotions themselves. I had a unique gift of helping women with their executive communication skills, both what they were saying, but also how they were saying it, how they were presenting, how they were thinking about themselves in their career pathway. So it wasn't enough just to raise your hand or to ask for more. You had to really investigate how you were showing up at work and what was the general perception and what was going to be needed to continue to, advance and advance and advance in your career. And so at the time, I really just was like, okay, I help women get promoted. And then I used all of my executive coaching training and skills to figure out what that was going to be. How was I going to help women get promoted? And within 6 months of starting my coaching business, I had 3 women land promotions in the C-suite just within the first 6 months of starting my coaching business. This is huge. And these were women. One was an internal promotion, one was an external promotion, one went from VP to the C-suite, one went from senior director to the C-suite, and one went to a smaller company where she just skipped leadership altogether and went straight to the C-suite. Okay. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you, one, is to say, hey, this process works, right? It can work in an incredibly short amount of time. And then I reverse engineered it and said, okay, what was it that we actually did to get them to promoted into those higher level leadership positions? And then I turned it into my executive promotion process. Since then, fast forward 8+ years, I have helped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women get themselves into higher level leadership positions. And I'm absolutely thrilled. So, about 4 years ago, I turned this into a scalable assessment. It's an assessment that you can access on my website. You can also go to readytobepromoted.com. And really, my goal with this assessment is to give you the perspective to see why you might not be getting promoted. Because most women who listen to this podcast think, I want to be promoted, but I just can't, or it's the circumstances, or things aren't working out. But typically, there is something that we can pinpoint to say, this is actually the reason that you're not ready to be promoted. So, the purpose of the assessment is to get you ready to see what those missing pieces might be in your career development path that would set you up for success at the next level. Now, why do we need to do that? Because you probably already have a development plan with your boss. And again, if you've been following me, you know what I'm about to say is that because what your boss tells you is often different than what you should actually do. So now I want to spend a second talking about performance reviews. Typically speaking, when you get a performance review, even if you create a development plan with your boss, it's going to be based literally on job performance, right? Are you doing your job well? Again, most of the women that I work with are doing a pretty kick-ass job, but they're still not getting promoted. So, like, what gives? And it's because the skill set needed to get promoted is very different than the skill set needed to be good at your job. Now, I say very different, but really they're very much intertwined, meaning the technical things that you do to get yourself into higher level leadership positions are not the technical things you do to do your job, but those skill sets of building relationships, managing up, having strategic conversations with executive leadership are the same skill sets that are needed to be successful once you actually get into those higher level leadership positions. So I'm going to break down the 5 parts of this executive promotion process, and then I encourage you to go take the assessment yourself so that you can kind of see where you land and where you fall on the scale of being ready to be promoted. Now, I talked about the data that I've collected over the years, and one of the things that I really notice is, and this is a self-assessment, is that sometimes I will have women take this assessment and then go to this extremes, meaning on the low side, it's a self-loathing assessment. It's like, I'm not doing any of these things listed in this assessment. No wonder things aren't working out for me in my career. And then on the upside, I'll have people check all the boxes and they seem to be getting very high scores in all the different areas of their career. But then I'm like, but why aren't you getting promoted? Like, maybe we need to get real. And typically what I'll do is I'll get real on some of the areas where maybe they were a 5 or a 6 out of 10. Honestly, when you have a conversation with me, I might be like, you're a 2. I'll give you an example. One of the sections of the Ready to be Promoted assessment is on building trust, which is essentially managing up. Do I have relationships with executive leaders all the way up to the C-suite? And like, am I really seen as that trusted and that valued leader? And you'll have direct feedback as to whether or not this is true based on, do they include you in conversations? Are you being recognized? Are you being pulled into meetings with the management team? Are you being tapped on the shoulder for the right kind of visibility projects and things like that? Then you could say, okay, things are going pretty well. But then there's this other sneaky thing, and I think the assessment does a really good job of really helping you see which are those areas where you might be building trust as a subject matter expert, but are you really building trust as an executive leader? And so this kind of comes down to our executives saying that you're very responsible, you're very intelligent, you're very smart, but are they actually saying that you're very strategic? Are you actually being asked for your ideas, being able to weigh in on some of the bigger opportunities? When you're able to weigh in on those bigger opportunities in front of you, that's when you know that you're truly building trust with executive leadership. So, this is the stuff that we work on inside of my leadership table, which is a one on one coaching and group mastermind where I take women through this process personally, one to one, and then we go into a higher level mastermind after they've had their success, after they've gotten their promotions. And then we really collaborate and have a lot of fun with the other VPs and executives in the group and talk about strategies to stay there. Like what's actually going to keep them successful at the executive suite, what's going to keep them from avoiding burnout, what's going to keep them from going back into their old habits. Because the truth is, every single one of them is so busy, right? We're all very, very busy. And, we don't have time to quote unquote do it all. And so having those strategic conversations with a group of women on a regular basis is like a game changer, right? So, this is essentially what is happening inside of my groups, but you can start out, even if you're not in my leadership table mastermind or working with me one to one, you can begin today just by taking this assessment, just by purchasing my book and really asking yourself the questions outlined in each chapter. Am I doing this? Am I really actually building trust? And the cool part is if you start to self-coach, if you do it for yourself, then you're going to be able to repeat it over and over and over again. So I highly, highly encourage that. All right, so let me continue. Building trust / managing up is one of the key areas of my executive promotion process. One of the other areas is really strategic thinking. Now, this basically is like, am I in the weeds all day? Am I head down, focusing on my projects? Do I believe that my work should speak for itself? Do I think that the way that I'm going to get promoted is by working harder? A lot of times that's what we're told, especially in our performance review. Like just focus on your work, focus on this project, and then we'll evaluate if you're ready for a promotion, right? And then, of course, guess what? Promotion time comes around and you're not promoted. Why? Because you didn't pull yourself out of the weeds and actually communicate as a strategic leader. And so that's where that shift ends up coming from is like, what is my communication strategy? Am I actually talking about the bigger why of the projects am I doing, except for really most of my one-on-ones are just about the deliverables and the work itself. I just go through my checklist. So that's the section where you're really going to learn what are the key areas of strategic thinking that I can begin to evolve. The other really big thing about my executive promotion process is, do you have a long-term vision for your career? I actually call this a 3X vision. And so if you know what your 3X vision is, great. But are you able to communicate it? Are you able to make decisions in the short term based on your 3X vision? The beautiful thing about having a longer term vision and actually communicating that to other people is that a lot of people can stand behind our longer term vision. Let's say that you're a director and you say, I want to be an SVP someday. Well, it's so far removed from being a director at this point. They're not going to argue with you and say, hey, guess what? You're never going to be an SVP, not here, not anywhere. Instead, they're just going to be like, wow, that's cool. How can I help you? Like that happens time and time again. But first of all, you have to know that that's my vision. And then from that place, you're going to start to deliberately manage your career. Now, not 24/7, not 40 hours a week, but, a couple hours a week, or maybe it's the 1 hour of this podcast that you're deliberately managing your career and really kind of making that forward progress because you know where you're headed. And you also have my executive promotion process to get you there. One of the other steps of my 5-step process is managing your own emotions. I call it, it's essentially emotional regulation. One big philosophy that I have is that our emotions are manageable, meaning that we can control them. And it sounds weird because I think if you're somebody who has lived with suppressed emotions or tampering it down or trying to push through, you know that is a shortcut to stress and burnout, right? So that is not what I'm advocating when I talk about managing your emotions. I talk about working with them. So here's a great example is that if you know that whenever you're triggered, like let's say my boss always triggers me, my boss is constantly asking me, what have I done lately? And I get so worked up afterwards and I'm very upset about it. If you know that that's a regular occurrence, you have a regular trigger, you can actually plan for that and strategically advise yourself on how you're going to react the next time this trigger that inevitably is going to happen happens. Isn't that cool? So that's how I think about managing your emotions is being able to sort of anticipate those things that happen time and time again, being able to look at it from a different lens and make different choices so that you can have that emotional regulation to weigh, the ups and the downs and the inevitable changes that happen at executive leadership and be able to be that strong continuity for your company. Obviously, in all of these areas is a form of executive communication. Essentially, we are learning executive presence. You're learning how to be and look and think and act like an executive. But here's the other thing. So, this is why executive communication is part of this 5-step process, is because you can't become them. You have to be yourself. So, in a recent podcast episode, I talked about my philosophy of same, but different, right? So, you need to learn how to communicate at those higher levels of executive leadership, how to talk about the strategy, how to speak out of the weeds, speak to that greater mission of the organization, but in your own way. So that way, you're not just sounding like them or becoming them, because the truth is, we don't need more of quote unquote them at executive leadership. We need you in a higher level leadership position, right? And so I need you to be able to make the decisions that you're able to uniquely make. But we also have to get you to that higher level leadership position, right? And so if you don't know how to speak same, but different language, then you're going to have a difficult time getting there. All right. So these are the 5 steps of my executive promotion process. Having a long-term vision for your career and being able to articulate that to others, being able to manage your emotions like it was your job, but doing it in a way where you can actually start to regain and have that level of control so that you can figure out and weather the storms of chaos that inevitably happen at executive leadership. Being that strategic thinker for your team and not just the subject matter expert, not just working on projects, but being able to zoom up and having that bigger picture. Really building trust when you're managing up. Do you have relationships with your boss's boss and your boss's boss's boss? Who knows not just about the work that you're doing, but about why your work matters? Who knows about your decision-making process in addition to the decisions that you're making? We need to make sure that we're building trust all across our organization, right? And so that many people know about the work that we're doing. And the good thing is that when you start to do that, then you understand your own processes and then you have a repeatable process as an executive leader as well. And then how are you communicating? Are you communicating as that subject matter expert or as that executive leader? What is your executive presence scale? You're going to get actual numbers when you go to readytobepromoted.com and you take my free promotability assessment. You're going to get the actual numbers of each of these categories. And if you have already taken this assessment in the past, maybe a couple of years ago, I encourage you to take it again and actually look at your growth and see how far you've come over the past couple of years and really identify those areas that continue to need to be developed. I can even throw out some specific podcast episodes that you can begin to listen to when you look at those lower areas so that you can begin to start to make that forward progress. And then if you want to work with me and deep dive on this one-on-one, I have some spots available for you. I have a 2-month deep dive one-on-one intensive coaching package that, relatively speaking, in the coaching world, in executive coaching world, I make it relatively affordable so that you can come in and you can get the support that you need so that you can begin to make those changes. And it could just be one of these 5 areas that you need to start to tweak and make a 20% shift in. And before you know it, you're not only going to see yourself promoted into those higher level of leaderships, but you're going to notice that the impact that you're able to make once you get there is like way higher than you ever could have imagined. That's what I want for you. This is why I do the work that I do. Definitely take the assessment. Let me know what you've learned from the assessment, and let's map out a plan together to get you to that next level of leadership. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to Women Changing Leadership with Stacy Mayer. If you enjoyed this episode, you are absolutely going to love and benefit from the work that we're doing inside of the Women's Leadership Accelerator. This month-to-month membership program is unlike anything else in the market. We are single-handedly flipping the unemployment rates on their head. It is the only place on the internet where you can actually get yourself not only a job offer, but one that has a higher salary, a higher title, and more recognition and influence than you ever could have imagined in your career. Inside the Women's Leadership Accelerator, we are getting women promoted. We are getting them multiple higher level job offers. And I want that to happen for you. Join us in this one-of-a-kind program. You're going to get coaching directly from me, my executive mentors who are also hiring managers who are doing the work, who have worked with me personally for the past 3 to 5 years. We are here inside of this accelerator program to work with you personally to begin to elevate your leadership to that next level. This is exactly what you have been looking for, and I am here to deliver it to you. Best thing, it's month to month. So you can come in, join us, get access to all of my training materials, my weekly live interactive calls, and you can begin to bring your friends into this community. It is the most corporate badass community on the market. I can't wait to see you in there. Go to authenticallypowerfulwomen.com. We are changing the face of the leadership table, one promotion at a time. I can't wait to see you there.